Thanks for joining us, everybody, for our monthly Hedera Savannah Meetup. We're back here with Caitlin from the Creative Coast. Creative Coast, big shout out to Creative Coast, as I always do. I've been working with Creative Coast closely since 2018. They've really been here. So Creative Coast is an organization here in the city of Savannah. Their motto is to create, code, and collide. So they facilitate a lot of relationships between investors, entrepreneurs, lawyers. Basically, they do everything they can to pull the Savannah community and surrounding areas together to help entrepreneurs and to help grow businesses and opportunities in the city of Savannah and surrounding areas. Jen Bonet is the director over there. Caitlin Lance both of those ladies have been huge help, and they're always doing great stuff for the community. So I always like to share my appreciation for that, whether it's holiday mixers where we get to meet others in the community. They do a lot of good stuff for us, and I'm always really grateful for that. So my name is Jeremy Fletcher. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Ledgerama, and Ledgerama is a cryptocurrency company. We built, let's see, got another one, letting somebody in here. Welcome, Brian. So yes, Ledgerama is a cryptocurrency company. We built the HBAR wallet, Walla Wallet. It's gotten some decent traction and good response from the community. It's available in 13 different languages, and it's the most secure and fully supported mobile wallet for Hedera Hashgraph. And we've had a good time building that product out. We've got some great promotions coming up in the near future, so hopefully people will stay tuned and look out for some great things coming down the line from Walla Wallet in the very near future. And so today, just a little bit of background on these Hedera Savannah meetups. I've been doing these since 2018 when I became a Hedera Hashgraph ambassador, and I've just continued doing it since then. I've become one of the Hedera MVPs, one of their most valuable players. It's a group of about 25 of us that are very close to the Hedera team, community members that have been there. Helping promote and explain Hashgraph technology, and basically help the larger community understand how Hedera Hashgraph has the ability to change the way that we interact. And their aim is to be the trust layer of the internet, and that's a lofty goal. But they've got the minds and the talent to do it, and so we've been following them closely and talking about them for quite a while here. And so like I said, I started doing these back in 2018, and it was therefore, while before the pandemic hit, it was just kind of a free-flowing opportunity for us to get together and talk about cryptocurrency and Hashgraph, Bitcoin. I mean, primarily it's a Hashgraph meetup, but we talk about pretty much anything under the sun. So if there's folks out there that have questions that don't necessarily have to relate to Hedera or Hashgraph, the topic that I'm going to be going over tonight is cryptocurrency regulations in the United States, kind of just the general climate. Gary Gensler is the chair of the SEC, and he went through a Senate hearing back in the middle of September where we kind of got to get a glimpse into what the Senate's thinking about cryptocurrency, and then what the regulators are thinking about cryptocurrency. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to get into some of the lessons or some of the most important things about the climate and the regulatory climate here in the United States. But again, this is an informal meeting, so feel free to stop me if you can't. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between some slides and then some video feed from the Senate hearing itself. So if something's screwy, if you're not hearing something right, or feel free to just jump in there, raise your hand, chime in, type something in chat, just let me know. We're talking about 5 things that you should know about crypto regulation in the United States. All right, so what are the concerns? So the concerns that are shared, that are expressed by the Senate throughout the video, essentially I broke it down into a few things, and then later on we're going to kind of go back to these and see if the Senate and the Security and Exchange Commission, to see whether are they in agreement, are they on the same page or not. But the concerns that they expressed, the working economy is suffering while cryptocurrencies and the stock market are booming. So they talk about small businesses, they talk about vacancies in real estate, unpaid rents, all the the disasters that have happened in the real working productive economy. But meanwhile, the stock market is breaking records day after day. I think there's some 53 plus records have been broken in the stock market this year alone. And of course, cryptocurrencies we've seen breaking all-time highs this year. Meanwhile, the productive economy is kind of just in shock and trying to come out of this pandemic. So investor protection, they're worried about fraud. They're saying that the cryptocurrency space is rife with fraud, that the SEC may use its authority to push a liberal agenda and freeze innovation by making rules and requiring reporting that's not financially relevant. They want to know if cryptocurrencies are securities. And they're also, particularly Senator Warren was concerned about high and unpredictable fees in cryptocurrency, which of course is an area where Hedera Hashgraph shines because, for one thing, the fees are low in Hedera Hashgraph and they're predictable. They're stable fees that are tied to the US dollar. So as an example, a transaction can cost a thousandth of a penny. And that transaction, unless at some point in the far future, if they decided to change that, of course, they have the ability to do so, but the fees are transparent and stable. So the first issue that I wanted to talk about was the issue of transparency. So Gary Gensler and the SEC are all about transparency and providing full and proper reporting to the investors. So I'm going to jump into some of the opening remarks from the Senate, and then also get a take from Gary on some of these items.
I know you've already gotten to work for the American people. You had your work cut out for you over the past year and a half. The disconnect between the stock market and most Americans' lives have never been more painfully clear. Most of the country's been devastated by this awful virus. Hundreds of thousands of lost loved ones. People lost jobs, lost family businesses. Mothers were forced to leave their paid jobs in droves. Millions today are still at risk of evictions from their homes. You'd never know any of that by looking at the stock market. It hits new records month after month. Listen to this, 53 records since the beginning of the year. Eye-popping gains in the stock market. Crypto assets attracted millions to start investing. And like during past times of upheaval, the COVID crisis opened the doors for bad actors looking to seize upon people's fears and insecurity.
All right, so that's covers some of the bit that I just talked about. We'll move up a little bit.
And 401ks and college savings are at risk. Many have been enticed by dramatic jumps in the value of new digital assets. They've dreamed of riding the coattails of professional investors and celebrities in a new way.
Okay, so yeah, so they're looking for, people are looking for quick, easy gains, and essentially the Senate's saying that it's full of fraud, and investors are getting suckered into deals that could be potentially bad for them. All right, so we're going to jump now to the bit where there's some concern expressed about the SEC's intentions going forward and whether it's going to use its authority in a way that is appropriate.
SEC has historically administered securities laws on a bipartisan basis generally. During your confirmation process, I expressed concerns that you might stray from this tradition and use the SEC to advance a liberal political agenda, such as combating global warming and advancing so-called social justice, and push the legal bounds of the SEC's authorities to pursue disclosures that are not financially material to the reporting company.
Right. So that's essentially it. They're afraid that the SEC is going to require companies to report and disclose things that are not financially material, things like gender bias in the workplace, things like issues like global warming. So there's arguments made on both sides. Gensler said, basically the SEC is saying, look, the investors get to decide what reporting that they want to see. But of course, there's pushback from private industry that say, look, there's certain reporting that is financially immaterial, and those are not things that the SEC has the authority to demand of us. So, right, so crypto, so there's a lot of issue in transparency, investor protection, protecting against fraud. One of the issues that I see with this is that transparency is often antithetical to the ethos of cryptocurrency. So being transparent, so now there's, transactions are transparent in some way, but you can read the transactions on the ledger, but there's no personally identifiable information attached with the majority of this stuff. And it's existing in a global marketplace. So there's definitely an issue there when you want, one of the questions that I have is, how do you ensure transparency of all parties? And one of the examples that I think of is, so let's say you've got a project that's coming out of India or any other country outside of the US. We don't have any way of gaining transparent. We don't necessarily have ways of gaining transparency into their systems, right? Yet it's a global marketplace. So if those tokens are going to be traded on exchanges within the US, there becomes an issue there. How do we verify? How do we get all this transparency from companies, particularly startups, early ventures that are in other countries? How do we get those? How do we make those available to the investors in the United States? Does that even make sense to try and make all this stuff transparent to the investors in the United States that may be requesting reporting? But if the reporting isn't available, does that mean that we shouldn't be able to invest or essentially, to invest in these digital assets? SEC filings and reporting are very time and cost intensive, and it may be very difficult for startups to fulfill all the compliance requirements. So if you're a startup, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to start up a coin offering, and you need to raise funds, well, all of the filings and reportings that are required by the SEC may be so prohibitive that it essentially can stifle innovation. So that's one of the issues. That's one of the primary issues that I got from this from the Senate hearing. So the second issue that's talked about quite a bit is the Wild Wild West. So certainly cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency markets have been compared to the Wild West on many occasions. And some of the reasons there being a lack of transparency into the projects, not enough investor protections. And particularly Gary Gensler talks about the issuance, trading, and especially lending of cryptocurrencies. And I'll jump into some of the video clip to talk about that.
We just don't have, I believe, enough investor protection in crypto finance, the issuance of these tokens, the trading, and particularly the lending. Frankly, as I've said before, I think it's more like the Wild West. I've asked the SEC staff, working with our fellow regulators, the Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, the bank regulators, the Treasury as well, using our current authorities, how can we best bring investor protection to these markets? I stand willing also to work with this committee and other committees at Congress if we take up any legislative initiatives. And then third, issuer disclosure. You see, since the 1930s, we've had a basic bargain. Investors get to decide what risks they take. That's up to investors. But Congress said that it should be based on full and fair disclosure of the issuers. Over the decades, we've updated what those disclosures are, and today's investors are increasingly looking for consistent, comparable, and decision-useful disclosures around climate risk, so-called human capital, cybersecurity, and other areas.
Okay. So there we go with the issuing, the trading, the lending. The SEC, of course, is concerned that they talk about investor protection. There's certainly concern that what they're really interested in is not so much investor protection, but rather control of the markets and the ability to tax the transactions, both of which are understandable from a regulatory standpoint, and that's what regulators do. So the SEC is currently working with the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. They want to work with bank regulators and the Treasury Department to design and enforce more investor protections. And one of just kind of a comment that I would make myself about the Wild West, if you look back at the history of the United States, the Wild West was one of the most profitable and explosive periods of growth in U.S. history. So I wonder what it would look like if the Wild West was not allowed to have happened. You know, if let's say the regulators were there checking people's wagon wheels to make sure that, oh, you know, your wagon wheels have to be secure. You know, you need to have XYZ pounds of rice. You got to have this much beef jerky. You know, if they had regulated these, you know, these pioneers, that these early entrepreneurs, if they had regulated them and not allowed them to go to travel west on their own of their own volition with their own and make their own decisions, what might the United States have looked like had that not been allowed to happen? Of course, I don't have the answers, but it's kind of an interesting mental experiment. So the third item that I think people should know is that they are considering, the SEC and the regulators in the United States are considering many tokens. I would argue the vast majority of tokens they are considering securities. And if they're not considered securities, they're under the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. So they're saying that many tokens are securities, failing the Howey test, according to Gary Gensler, right? They offer, and the reasons being, they offer controlling and voting interest via things like staking and other mechanisms. There's an offer, in the offers, there's an expectation of future profits in these initial coin offerings and things like that. You could perhaps even argue this, even SAFT agreements, that there's an expectation of profit, and therefore fails the Howey test. Basically, the Howey test is what the courts in the United States use to gauge whether or not something is a security. And basically, if you're not familiar with the Howey test, it kind of goes like this: if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, we're calling it a duck. And same thing with these investment vehicles or initial coin offerings, coins in general. If they're offering expectations of profits, if there's some level of control going to the holders, right, then we're failing the Howey test, and these things are securities, and therefore the SEC is authorized to regulate them. However, on the other hand, tokens such as Bitcoin are existing products with established utility, and they're being regulated under the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. Now, certainly there is an expectation of profit when people buy Bitcoin, for the most part. I mean, people aren't buying Bitcoin because they want to try and buy a Lamborghini with it, or they want to try and buy a cup of coffee or something. They're buying it because it's a highly volatile speculative asset with the expectation of profits. However, they're kind of getting a pass, I think, partly because they're established in the marketplace. One of the things that the SEC is going after are not only do these tokens offer voting interest, voting and controlling interest and expectation of future profits, but they're doing so with platforms that are not complete. They're essentially non-existent products, right? So it's an investment because the coin doesn't even do anything yet. And they did a study, I forget the numbers, but it was the number of projects that are considered incomplete is the vast majority. Something like 97% of the projects are considered incomplete products at this point. Now, granted, that statistic comes from a few years ago, so that may have, so I'm sure that's been whittled down to some degree, but still, by and large, they're considering many of the platforms to be unfinished products, and therefore, if you're issuing a token and selling it to investors, it's a security. Now, so that kind of raises some questions about Hedera Hashgraph and the approach that Hedera Hashgraph has used going forward. I think that they did. I certainly think that. Okay, I just got a message. Participants can now see your screen. Is there not? Well, hopefully you've been able to see the screen that I've been sharing the whole time. Okay, I got a thumbs up. So.
I think it was because somebody just joined.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So let's see. I can't see everybody here. Let's see if anybody. Lena. Hi, Lena. Right. So there are some questions about SAFT agreements, right? So Gary Gensler, back in I believe it was 2019, said that he felt that that with the SAFT agreements, the lawyers, I like the way that he put it, the lawyers got in between the wall and the wallpaper with the SAP agreements, right? So basically, what Gary's saying was that, now this is my take on it. He's saying that he does think that SAP agreements, tokens issued under SAP agreements, should be regulated as securities. However, since then, the Hedera product is live. They went open access. It's being used in platforms all over the world. So it's certainly, I would certainly argue that it is in fact a utility token and should therefore be regulated under the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, because it's now a utility. It's being used. And if they hadn't made any rulings about SAP agreements at the time when the SAP agreements were made, at least not to my knowledge, such that to issue enforcement actions, enforcement letters and action letters against somebody like Hedera after the fact without having clearly established rules to begin with, I think would be a mistake, right? They hadn't established clarity and rules, and you can't, in my opinion, you shouldn't go back retroactively and go after platforms that are issuing tokens. But whether they go by that or not is kind of hard to say. The issues that they've had, the issues that XRP and Ripple have had, and now Coinbase. Coinbase is under a class action lawsuit for not registering as a broker dealer in the United States. So Coinbase is under fire, and it's, again, this is part of why I'm so interested in the regulatory environment, because there's still a lot of gray area. There's still a lack of clarity, and we just have to kind of bide our time and patience and see how these things turn out. So issue 4, one of the big issues that they talked about throughout the Senate hearing was stablecoins. So Gary Gensler says that stablecoins may be securities, but he really, throughout the hearing, doesn't really offer an explanation why, other than to say that throughout history, the Securities and Exchange Commission has the precedent of regulating all kinds of things as securities, and he raises he brings up the whiskey casks. I think during the Prohibition era, or just after the Prohibition era, and so I'm not familiar with how that came about, but somehow the SEC wound up regulating oak whiskey casks as securities. So Gary's saying that, look, we have the authority and the precedence to basically regulate any of these tokens, particularly if they fail the Howey test. But the argument that's made, but there's an argument made against that by Senator Toomey, saying that there's a lack of clarity on how the SEC would apply the Howey test to stablecoins because there's no expectation of profits. Therefore, it's not a security. If you are a holder of a stable coin, just by nature of being a stable coin, its value is intended to be stable. There's no expectation of profit. Therefore, it does not fail a Howey test and should not be regulated as a security, and that no enforcement action should be taken retroactively without clarity as to how stable coins are securities. And I'll get into that a little, and I'll share a little bit of that clip here.
Mr. Chairman, but I think I know your position, among other things, is that not all cryptocurrencies are inherently securities, right? That's true.
There's a small number that aren't, but I think that, as Chair Clayton said when he was in front of Congress, I think very many of these facts and circumstances are investment contracts.
So here's my concern. So some are and some aren't, is basically what you're saying. And I'm concerned that the SEC has not provided sufficient definition and explained how it would apply the Howey test, which I think is the court standard for determining when something is an investment contract. So for instance, stablecoins do not have an inherent expectation of profit. They're just linked to the dollar. Now you might use them in an attempt to make a profit, but that's a second order activity. Is it your view that stable coins themselves can be securities?
I think it's, Senator, they may well be securities. As Thurgood Marshall wrote in the Reeves opinion, in defining the scope of the market that Congress, wished to regulate, Congress painted a broad brush, and it actually included about 35 different things inside the definition of a security in the 33 Act.
I've just got limited time here, so I acknowledge that. Here's my problem, though. I think what you just said was that they may be securities, or that some are securities. To me, a stable coin doesn't meet the second prong of the Howey test, that there has to be an expectation of profits from the investment. And so if it doesn't meet the Howey test, it looks to me like it's not a security. Now, maybe you've got a good argument for why some are and some aren't. My whole point is, I think we need to have clarity on this. I think you should publicly disclose this. Apparently, there are private conversations where you work with people who are proposing particular structures and you give them advice, your staff gives them advice. I just think we ought to have that publicly, and we certainly shouldn't be taking enforcement action against somebody without having first provided that clarity.
Well, Senator, this Congress could change the laws, but the laws that we have right now have a very broad definition of security, including a note, including an investment contract and the like. And my predecessor, Chair Clayton, and others actually put out a lot of guidance with regard to the Howey.
I just got to push back a little bit on that. It is broad, but it's well defined. There is a very specific litany of the instruments that constitute securities, as you know this better than I do. Investment contract is one of them. And there is a court decision that lays out the prongs for what constitutes an investment contract. I'm just saying, as a layman who can read English, when I read those tests, stable coins don't seem to meet that test to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I can misinterpret this, I think others could too, and some clarity, public clarity, I think would be helpful.
I see the red light, but I agree with you that some of these tokens have been deemed to be commodities. Many of them are securities, and the Supreme Court has weighed in a number of times. You noted the Howey test. We've talked about the Reeves test, was in the 1990s as well, has weighed in, and I think that there's a fair amount of clarity. Over the years, the SEC has even found, believe it or not, whiskey caskets, and the courts agreed in the 1960s were investments. And I think at the heart of our securities laws was protecting investors against fraud. They get to decide, they get to take the risk. You'll find I'm not negative or a minimalist about crypto. I just think it would be best if it's inside the investor.
Inside the investor protection regime is what he was going to say. So, right. So there we go. Stable coins, are they securities? He says they may be, doesn't really offer too much explanation as to how, other than to say, we have the authority to regulate pretty much anything that comes under our radar. And then I like Senator Toomey's point about no enforcement action should be taken retroactively without clarity as to how the coins are securities. I think it makes a good point. So, and then item 5, probably the most, probably the item that has the most teeth for the SEC in terms of its authority and desire to regulate the cryptocurrency space. Gary Gensler says that systems that exist outside of anti-money laundering and outside of AML laws and outside of tax compliance will not long persist. And that's pretty strong language indicating that if you are not, if you're not abiding by AML and tax compliance, they're going after you. Now we can see in the case with Coinbase here, they've got a class action lawsuit against them for operating as a broker dealer within the United States without a license. And Gary Gensler says that a number of times that they've had numerous opportunities to register with the SEC. That they've been warned that they were dealing with tokens that were likely securities. They failed to register, and now I don't believe it's not the SEC that's going after them. It's other broker dealers, but it's going to go before the SEC. And I'm not sure Coinbase is going to fare very well in that fight. So essentially, this is a stark warning to coin administrators, coin exchangers, and coin users that the SEC is going after projects that do not comply with AML and tax requirements. I think Hedera has done a fantastic job of staying within those lines so far. Now, there is some issues about the SAP. There may be some question about the SAP agreements. That's between the lawyers and the SEC. But I think by and large, Hedera has been very transparent and to both as a coin administrator. I think Hedera has followed at least all the rules that it could. There may be some gray lines, and where there was gray area, I think Hedera perhaps erred on the side of caution. So a lot of bonuses there, but still, it is kind of it's a gray area, and we're going into the future with some unknowns for sure. And then so they're going after coin administrators, which are platforms such as Hedera, Ripple, Hex, any of these that are basically coin issuers. Coin exchangers are the exchanges, fiat ramps. In the United States, they're required to have money transmitter laws. And then there's coin users, which are the retail investors and the users, and the SEC is going after them. Now with Walla Wallet, you might say that we're between the wall and the wallpaper, but not really, because in the FinCEN laws, basically what they say, they make an exception for what they call unhosted wallets, which basically is a wallet where the user is control of their keys, right? So with Walla Wallet, we have no way of knowing or accessing your private keys. They're on your device, locked, tucked away, locked away from us. We don't have any control over that, and therefore we are what's considered an unhosted wallet. And essentially we're just providing software that interacts with the networks, but we're not in any way, we're not handling anybody's keys, we're not handling anybody's tokens. So we've got that unhosted status. And so with systems basically they're saying that companies need to innovate within the regulatory framework. Innovation has been happening for a long time within the regulatory framework, and it allows access to capital formation. Being registered with the SEC allows for capital formation. Basically, what they're saying is you can't raise money unless we say you can raise money. And they advise that companies that have questions or have doubts or concerns about their legal status and cryptocurrency in the United States, they need to come into the walk into the open arms of the regulatory regime, the Security and Exchange Commission or the CFTC, and either seek exemption or no action letters. And but yeah, basically that's their stance, is that you need to register and you need to be within the regime. And I'm gonna skip to to some of the stuff in the video here that covers that.
For many of these companies that have come to speak with you have soon after found themselves the targets of enforcement actions or even legal threats. Question is, what's the process for the SEC to provide guidance, and what might come as expect from talking directly with you?
So just real quickly, a note about this. So basically, Gensler said, "Hey, look, if you want to do business in the United States, you need to come into the open arms of the regulatory regime." But what this senator is saying is, yeah, well, the companies that have done that have gone into the open arms of the regulatory regime have gotten slapped with fines and and enforcement letters. So see how Gary responds here.
I thank you. I want to say, I think the way we innovate is within public policy frameworks, but we have asked companies to come in, talk to us. If they're trading or lending a security, there's a registration regime. And companies since the 1930s, for 90 years, have found ways to innovate, but register, or seek an exemption, or seek a no action letter, and work with us to ensure that they're registered, but there's a public policy framework around that. So you're drawing lines through public statements without actually going through an APA process. What kind of responsibility do you have to provide clarity?
And I apologize for the sound quality here. I think I don't know if it was the senator's microphone, or I've watched this on multiple devices and I get the static everywhere. So I apologize for the sound quality here, but it is what it is.
to market participants as opposed to really chilling the marketplace, doing some of these vague speeches, vague remarks, vague interviews. So
Yeah, chilling the marketplace. I think that's fairly important language. Essentially, those that are in favor of less regulations are saying, look, you're squashing innovation. How, and like I mentioned earlier, how is a startup company with minimal resources, how are they supposed to possibly provide all of the reporting and compliance requirements of the Security and Exchange Commission? I mean, it is very intensive in terms of time and money. And so if you're going to make all these requirements, you're going to stifle innovation, because entrepreneurs, startup companies, they just can't afford it. So essentially the potential there is for them to, again, hand the investment and capital formation opportunities to those that can afford it, whereas the entrepreneurs and the startups that can't will be left behind.
So with all respect, I think that actually the SEC has the authorities that Congress granted to, and it's a very broad definition of security. It includes investment contract, includes note, includes 35 other things. My predecessors put out various guidance, Chair Clayton and so forth put out guidance in this area as well. And so I think come in, talk to us, not you, Senator, but the entrepreneur, and work within investor protection regime that also facilitates capital formation. I fear if it stays outside this field that I studied for 3.5 years at MIT, I have a belief that this has been a catalyst for change. But I think if it stays outside of the public policy framework for anti-money laundering, tax compliance, investor protection, it's not going to long persist. I want to shift gears when we talk about.
All right, so there you have it. If you're outside of the regulatory regime, you will not long persist. So says Gary Gensler. All right, so but on the other hand, I don't want to come down too hard on old Gary. I like Gary Gensler. I really enjoyed watching his MIT courses. He's got a great mind. I like watching him speak. He comes off with an air like he respects innovation. And I think he does. I mean, he respects the innovation. But he's the chair of the SEC, so they're gonna, it's his job to regulate things. So that's what they do. So one of the questions that I asked at the beginning of the talk, I talked about what are some of the concerns, and I thought it was kind of an interesting exercise to look at the end. Are the SEC and the Senate on the same page? So the first senator that talked about the working economy suffering and that the stock markets and cryptocurrencies are booming while the productive economy is suffering. Gensler didn't have anything to say on that, and so I think in that one I'm going to say no. The Senate and the SEC in that sense, they are not on the same page. One of the major concerns was that cryptocurrency is rife with fraud. I think definitely we can say that that both the Senate and the regulator agree that cryptocurrency is rife with fraud. So they are on the same page there. Senator Toomey's and a number of other senators that I haven't covered, but a number of the other senators raised concerns about the SEC using its authority to push liberal agendas that are not necessarily financially relevant to the reporting. Things like gender bias and things like global warming, those kinds of reporting requirements. Some are saying that these are not financially relevant. Gensler's position is that, hey, look, the investor gets to decide, but they also gets to decide in what they invest in. It's their money, but they also get to decide what they want to see reported. Therefore, if the investors are saying that they want to see more reporting on what they call human capital, if they want to see those, if investors want to see that data, if things like gender bias are important to them, then the investors get to know. If things like global warming are important to them, the investors get to know. So, so I can't really argue with Gensler in that sense. If the investors want to get certain reporting from the companies, they certainly have the right to ask it. Whether or not the SEC has the authority to enforce that that's a little bit up in debate, whether some of these issues are financially material or not. So as a question of are cryptocurrencies securities, there's disagreement, right? So Some of the senators would definitely agree with Gary Gensler that they are securities and need to be regulated as such. And then there's others that say no, perhaps they're not. So it's kind of it's kind of a flip flop, just like the SEC using its authority to push a liberal agenda. Of course, with the Senate, it's a partisan. There's Republicans and Democrats. Unfortunately, we're largely a two-party system here in the U.S. So on that issue, you've got some saying yes and some saying no. So that's kind of in the middle there. And then the high unpredictable fees in cryptocurrency. This was one of the more important. Wasn't something that I touched on very much so far, but I think it's really important. And it was one of the things that, while it didn't get a lot of attention in the Senate hearing, I do think it's important. Now, whether it's necessarily relevant to the SEC or not, that's I couldn't really say. But Elizabeth Warren raises some issues with the high unpredictable fees in cryptocurrency. I just kind of wanted to jump into those.
There's a user agreement. There's something you're doing with this platform. There's a governance token. There's usually some fees, but I don't know what the particular fees would be. Well,
he's talking about DeFi there. So Senator Warren refers to DeFi, and she uses quotation marks around when she says DeFi. And Gary says, "I'm glad you used the quotation marks, because this DeFi stuff, what he's saying is it's not really decentralized at all. It's actually there is an issue. There are investment contracts." I'm not really sure that he understands DeFi all that well. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. That's another debate.
Well, actually, we do know some of the fees from last Tuesday. The fee to swap between two crypto tokens on the Ethereum network was more than $500. Obviously, way more than the $100 I was trying to trade in the first place. So
she used an example. She didn't actually. I'm not saying she actually tried to invest $100 in DeFi. She used kind of a generic example, particularly of somebody with less capital to invest. Somebody that's got $100. She's saying they're going to be very concerned about their $100. They need to be able to get in and out of the markets quickly.
The question I have is, in the face of these high, unpredictable fees, small investors could easily get jammed and wiped out entirely. Chair Gensler, advocates say crypto markets are all about financial inclusion, but the people who are most economically vulnerable are the ones who are most likely to have to withdraw their money the fastest when the market drops. Does this sound like the path to financial inclusion to you?
Okay, so that's Senator Warren's bit on high unpredictable fees. I do think she makes a good point. And that's a big reason that a lot of us are so interested in Hedera Hashgraph. They're low fees and they're very predictable. So big bonus points on the low predictable fees. So all in all, could we say that the SEC and the Senate are on the same page? It's a little bit difficult, but so if I were to score this, and let's say a 3 out of 5, you've got two yeses, 2 maybes, and a no. I don't know. I think that leans to they're somewhere on the fence in the middle. So basically, we've got a lot of work to do still. Because it's, is the SEC and the Senate on the same page? Are they ever on the same page? It's only recently that I really started to follow the SEC, so it's hard for me to say. But at this time, it seems like they're kind of on the fence. Some of them are on the same page, and some of them aren't. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. I think that was all I had from the video. Yep, that's all I had. So I'm going to go ahead and stop share. And I will open it up to any questions. Hey, Jonathan, how's it going? Jonathan popped in here. I was hoping to get some insight from Jonathan on from the state of affairs in Canada. Jonathan's up in Vancouver, so I wanted to see if you had any insight into how things are going over in Canada. But any closing thoughts here, Jonathan? Anything that you noticed or anything you'd like to talk about before we wrap it up?
I jumped into a little bit late, but what's happening in Canada is much different. I think it's much more centralized, where the government officials, the politicians, and Central Bank of Canada and how they regulate crypto is pretty much all on the same page. So you're not going to get different departments like the SEC, FINRA, and different organizations not knowing how to treat the taxes. Everything is fairly clear, and it's a very centralized approach to things.
Okay. I'd say then by and large, the regulators and the representatives are in lockstep.
Pretty much, yeah.
So do you think, so is that, so you think that's positive for Canada? You think, I mean, what are you seeing out of the markets in general? Are you seeing, now I recently saw that, that Binance got the kibosh put on them by the Canadian government.
Mhm.
So are you seeing that as generally positive for cryptocurrency in Canada? Or are you seeing it as more of a negative or kind of somewhere in the middle?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think what happens with things like CBDC and things in the future will really show kind of what the path is going to be. CBDC is going to be a very centralized way of actually rolling it out. They have like 3 white papers out on it. But generally, a lot of politicians aren't speaking up too much about it. So this is not really driven from the political class. It's not driven by the political class. Economists are talking about it. Business people are talking about it. There isn't too many ruffles up here.
Right, right. So what do you think about, so, you know, so Gary Gensler, and we've talked a little bit about this, but so their position is, you know, is that, look, we're trying to protect investors, right? We're trying to open it up and increase the reporting, increase the transparency, and protect investors against fraud. What do you think about?
Well, knowing what I know about, you know, coming from the public markets, the SEC, you kind of have to compare it to what they do with public markets, right? So there's lots of scams happening in the public markets, and it's highly regulated, right? So it's not like more regulation gives you a better outcome.
Interesting.
You know, there's still, if you look at all the penny stocks and what's happening in the SEC markets, you know, it can be, they're doing a big push right now, even with the pink sheets and the semi-deregulated market. But, you know, scams still do happen, right? So I don't know if overhanded regulation is going to be a positive. I think that will actually stifle innovation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's and I can't disagree with you, particularly because of the point that I raised about the reporting requirements and staying in compliance with the, you know, with the SEC and what they're, I mean, it's for a startup and an entrepreneur, it's going to be very difficult. All right, Caitlin, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here as always. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll get ready to see you next time. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to wrap this up here in just a minute and stop the recording. But yeah, you feel free to, you can go ahead and escape as needed. So, all right. So Brian, Brian, Lou, Jonathan, any of you, are there any questions or any topics that you'd kind of like to get into before we go ahead and wrap it up here?
Not for me. I was just interesting subject, and had been wanting to join a meetup that actually was meeting now.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Brian. I really appreciate you being here. You know, these sometimes we've got a lot of folks come into the Hedera meetups and sometimes not so many. It kind of just depends, you know, from month to month, it changes. I do miss the days where we were all meeting in person and we could sit around and, you know, have a drink and, you know, enjoy some snacks. Lou who's on the call, would often join me and make some fantastic food, and we'd sit around and talk shop. I do miss those days. I hope that we can get back to those one day soon. But on the other hand, the virtual format does open it up such that I can have folks from Canada and, you know, Taiwan or anywhere else in the world join in. So
yeah. I'm joining from St. Louis. So yeah.
Oh, all right. St. Louis. I've got it.
There's not one in St. Louis. So, I mean, I would prefer to meet in person, but if everything was in person, then I wouldn't be in a Hedera meetup.
Right. Gotcha. Understood. I can understand that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Hedera Savannah Meetup. We typically meet every first Monday, so this is a little bit. I had some obligations on the first Monday of the month, the first Monday this month, and then Caitlin had some obligations on the second Monday, so we wound up being the third Monday this month. But typically, we meet on the first Monday. Again, my name is Jeremy Fletcher. This has been hosted by the Creative Coast of Savannah, Georgia. Shout out to Jen Bonet, the director of Creative Coast. She's been a big help to me really since the beginning, since I got started on this crazy entrepreneurial journey. Caitlin Lance is always helping out a lot. Big thanks to Lou for being here. He's supported me in many of my harebrained schemes and continues to do so. So I appreciate that. And Jonathan and I, we work together in many projects and aspects. So Jonathan and I are working closely all the time, and I always appreciate his help and insight. So I know you had a meeting that went over, Jonathan. I just wanted to put that out there so folks know that you weren't just ignoring me. You were in the middle of something else that was important. And when you got to us, you could, and I appreciate it. And so, yeah, again, first Monday of the month. Hopefully we see you folks next time. And until then, enjoy the rest of your month. Reach out to us if you need anything. wallawallet.com. We're there. We've got a Telegram channel. We've got a Discord channel. We're here for you if you need us. All right. Thanks, folks.